We're going to take a look at the white blood cells that make up part of the immune system. So the immune system is made up of two things, the leukocytes, which are the white blood cells, and also the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is pictured over here on the right. There's a lot of parts to it. It includes things like the bone marrow, thymus, spleen, tonsils, lymph nodes, lymphatic vessels, and so we'll look at that in another lecture. So these are all the leukocytes, the white blood cells that are part of the immune system. So we're going to go through and talk about what each of them do. So the white blood cells, some of them are involved in specific immunity, that would be the B and T lymphocytes, and then the rest of them will be involved in the non-specific immune defenses. So the process of making blood cells is called hematopoiesis. Poiesis means to form. Hemato is blood. So there are hematopoietic stem cells that are located in the red bone marrow. So in the adults, this is where it's located, colored in the dark red. And then up here at the top, you can see the ball of the femur. They've kind of cut part of it off here, and so you can actually look down inside and see the red bone marrow, and that's where these hematopoietic stem cells are. So they will develop all of the leukocytes, erythrocytes, and platelets. You don't need to memorize this, but it's just showing you the process of hematopoiesis. So here are the stem cells located in the red bone marrow, and depending on the signal they get, they can go different directions and make the red blood cells, platelets, and then all of the types of white blood cells over here. So it's just kind of interesting to look at to see which white blood cells are more closely related to each other, which we'll talk about. So all I really want you to get out of this table is that if you're looking at a blood smear, the most numerous cell that you're going to see on the slide are the red blood cells, followed by the platelets, and then the white blood cells will be the least numerous of the cells in the blood. And then out of the white blood cells, the most common white blood cell you're going to see on a blood smear will be the neutrophils. And then the rarest type of white blood cell to see on a blood smear would be the basophils. So we're going to classify the white blood cells that we see on the blood smear into two groups. We have the granulocytes and the agranulocytes. So the granulocytes have granules in their cytoplasm, and they're just little membrane-bound sacs of nasty chemicals which they'll use to kill off the invaders and cause inflammation. It's really easy to remember the granulocytes. They're the three phils. So we have neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils. Those are all granulocytes. The agranulocytes, A meaning without, so they do not have granules in their cytoplasm. And these include the monocytes and macrophages and the lymphocytes. So let's take a look at our granulocytes first. We'll start with the neutrophils. So they're called neutrophils because their granules stay in kind of a more neutral pink color. And their nucleus is segmented. It's kind of pinched off in places. And their big job is they're phagocytes. So they will go around and eat things. They're not picky. Anything they find that doesn't belong there, they will eat. How they figure out that something doesn't belong there, they have these pattern recognition receptors that are called toll-like receptors. And they will recognize what are called PAMPs. And PAMP stands for pathogen associated molecular pattern. So PAMP is just something that's found on the microorganism that is not found anywhere on our cells. So PAMP could be peptidoglycan cell wall. It could be lipopolysaccharide from the outer membrane of a gram-negative bacteria. It could maybe be the flagellin protein from bacteria flagella. So any of those could be PAMPs, and they're just things that we don't find on our cells, and so the neutrophil will recognize that right away as that doesn't belong here and it needs to be eaten. So here's just a picture of a neutrophil. Any of the phagocytes will have these toll-like receptors on them, these receptors that will recognize the PAMPs, the pathogen-associated molecular patterns. So maybe this PAMP here is, maybe it's part of the peptidoglycan cell wall on the bacterial cell. So it is important to know, and we'll be talking about this, there are 4 different phagocytes. We have neutrophils, monocytes, macrophages, and dendritic cells. So all 4 of those are phagocytes. So make sure you have those memorized. Those are pretty important. Okay, the next granulocyte are the eosinophils. Their granules stain red. So you can see in this picture on the bottom right, the nucleus is stained purple, and then all the granules in the cytoplasm, you can see they're a red color. So the eosinophils, their big job is to defend against parasites. So for example, if you had an intestinal worm, the eosinophil will come up to it. It's stimulated by the antibodies that are bound to the worm, and that will tell the eosinophil to release the granule contents, which will then poke holes into the worm, and then water will move in, and then the worm explodes. So that's how it kills the worms. It's also involved in allergic reactions. It kind of helps clean up the mess that's being made. And it is phagocytic, but that's not the main job of the eosinophils. So usually going after these worms, they're too big to eat, so it attacks them by releasing the granule contents. The basophils, our last granulocyte, they have dark staining blue granules, and their granules contain histamine. Histamine is involved in causing inflammation and allergies. So if you have allergies, you can blame your basophils for releasing histamine and causing the symptoms of allergies. Mast cells are very similar to basophils, but they're not found in the blood. They're just found in the tissues. They also have these blue staining granules that contain histamine, and they release that to cause inflammation and allergies. So if you do have allergies, you can blame both basophils and mast cells for making you miserable. Monocytes and macrophages, these are both phagocytes, and they're agranulocytes, so they do not have any granules in their cytoplasm. The monocytes are found in the blood, but then they migrate into the tissues and turn into macrophages. And macrophages, that word macro meaning big, and phage means to eat, so it means they're big eaters. And again, they're non-specific. They will eat anything that doesn't belong there. They're not very picky, so they're part of the non-specific defenses. So just a little bit more on the macrophages. We have 2 different types. Some of them just live in one place and they don't wander around the body. They just live in one site. Those are called fixed macrophages or histiocytes. So histio means tissue. For example, the alveolar macrophages that live in the alveolar of the lungs, those are fixed, so they don't go anywhere else in the body. Other macrophages are free or wandering, and they will roam the body looking for any invaders. The macrophages are just like the neutrophils in that they have the toll-like receptors, and that's how they recognize those PAMPs. So things that are just associated with the pathogens like peptidoglycan, lipopolysaccharides, things that we don't find in our cells, it knows that it needs to eat those and get rid of them. The other thing you need to star about the macrophages is that they're antigen-presenting cells. So whatever that they've eaten, they will actually present a piece of it to the helper T lymphocytes, which we'll talk about in the next chapter. The dendritic cells are similar to macrophages. They're just found in the tissues. They're also phagocytes, so they have the toll-like receptors. So any PAMPs that they find, they will go ahead and eat those. And then star that they are also antigen-presenting cells, so just like the macrophages. So both macrophages and dendritic cells are antigen-presenting cells. So they both will present a piece of what they've eaten to the helper T cells to see if they recognize it. The lymphocytes, they are the smallest of the white blood cells, and they have a really big nucleus. That's how you recognize them, with very little cytoplasm. There are 3 different types of lymphocytes. We have B lymphocytes, T lymphocytes, and natural killer cells. The B and T lymphocytes, both of those are part of the specific immune response, and we'll talk about those more in the next chapter. The natural killer cells are non-specific. They will go after and kill any infected cell or cancer cells, so they're not going to be picky about who they kill. The B and T lymphocytes are both made in the bone marrow, just like all of the other white blood cells. They are very specific to what they recognize. So you're going to have millions and millions of different B and T lymphocytes, and each one recognizes a different pathogen. If they find their match, they will react to it, but if it's not their match, they just ignore it. If they do find their match, they will become activated, start dividing, and they will make 2 different groups of cells. The effector cells will go and fight off the invader. The memory cells will sit on the sidelines and kind of root for the home team, but they're not going to participate in the battle. The memory cells are very important because they're there for the next time you're infected with the same pathogen. So if you get infected again, then the memory cells will respond much quicker and stronger, and then you don't get sick the next time around.